Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Talking Water. Tonight's episode is going to be centered around the 2022 drinking water rate proposal. We do jointly bill for many of our customers with clean water services, and we can refer you to them if you have questions about your waste and stormwater services. But just keep in mind when we talk about amounts and percentages, we're only talking about the drinking water side. We do that as a cost saving measure for our customers, but we are two separate utilities with two separate governance and rate setting processes. Next slide, please, Paul. Again, we want to thank you for joining us. We'll go over a little bit of the logistics about how Microsoft Live Events works. We really, I think we're over 20 of these sessions now, and we really enjoy the content. We have some great information for you up front. And then after that, we do a question and answer session. You can type your questions into that little thought bubble. It sort of looks like a cartoon conversation bubble with a question mark inside of it. And then one of our staff members will locate a subject matter expert based on your question who will answer it at the end. So it will take a little bit of time for that to show up in your chat. You don't need to re-enter the question. We will get to it. It just does take us a few minutes. As a reminder, we are a public agency and your questions and comments become part of the public record. And then we also record these sessions for customers who maybe aren't able to join us at a specific time. They can view that this content later. We will also just want to remind you that we have a non-discrimination and inclusive practices policy. So we do ask that you keep your comments, clean of profanity and things like that. If you do type anything in there that would violate those policies, then we do clean that up and retype your question without it. So we just ask that you respect, that this is a shared audience and people will need to view it later. So we do need to honor those policies. Next slide, please. Tonight we have some great presenters for you. Their experience is really deep. We have our CEO, Tom Hickman, and we also have our Willamette Water Supply Program Director, Dave Kraska. The PE behind their name is professional engineer. That's what that stands for. If you're new to our events, you may not have heard it before. And then Paul Matthews, he's our Chief Financial Officer, and he's really going to go over the numbers and how we arrived at this proposal amount for this year's rate increase. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over right away to our Chief Executive Officer, Tom Hickman.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you to everyone joining us. I do want to acknowledge that we have some of our board members who represent you are on the call tonight, and so they'll be listening in as well. And we just want you to know that we take everything we hear very seriously, and we do try to acknowledge what we hear from our customers. This lays out kind of what our operations are day to day and what our district priorities are. But I will tell you, while we have a lot of different priorities, a lot of things going on, the big ones that we have are really centered around the Willamette Water Supply System, which is why you're going to be hearing about that this evening. But along with that, we have a responsibility to make sure the existing infrastructure that we have is there and able to meet demands today as well as into the future. So a significant part of our priorities is that work as well. And then we also focus a lot on our partnerships, which help lower costs. You'll hear more about that in a moment. And then seeking federal and state grant support, which you'll also hear about momentarily. Next slide, please. So getting to the crux of this presentation and why you're attending, what's changed? What's going on here? Why are we doing this? So the construction costs for the Willamette Water Supply Program have increased by approximately $315 million. This increase has occurred since December 15th of this last year, so all within the last year. This was something that hit everybody by surprise. And we had actually taken actions before this had happened to try to anticipate some increases, and we had made some significant costs trying to offset the cuts, trying to offset any future increases to the cost of the program, but we were not anticipating costs of this significance. And then we've also seen increase in our costs in our operations and in our district capital projects. Much like the Willamette Water Supply Program, similar things are driving that. And when I talk about similar things, I'm talking about supply chain issues. I'm talking about inflationary measures, labor costs. All of those things have impacted our in-district capital work as well. So what's this mean to you as a ratepayer? And what it means is that rates are proposed to increase by $8.81 per month for a typical user. That's 14.25% increase on November 1st of this year. That is instead of what was already approved of $5.83 per month to a typical water customer, which was 9.5%. So our board adopts rates for a 2-year period. And when they adopted them for 2 years, they had already approved 9.5%. So what we're talking about here is instead of 9.5%, we're looking at a 14.25%. Or approximately $3 a month increase from what we had anticipated. Next slide, please. So why? Why are we doing this project? Maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't, maybe you've seen some of this presentation before. But I think it's important for everyone to understand why we're doing this. We do have threats to our water supply. First and foremost is a seismic event, a resulting earthquake, which is a threat to both of our current supplies that we have to the region. Drought, obviously, we're seeing changes as a result of climate change. And then things like power outages and fires are also risks to our water supply. All of this is stuff that we are looking at with the Willamette Water Supply to try to mitigate some of these very same threats, if not all of them. Next slide, please. So we do have multiple water sources. So we do have river water that we get through the Tualatin River watershed that we collect in the Barney Reservoir. And for us, that's one of our main supply sources, as well as from Scoggins Dam, our Heg Leg. And that water flows down, gets treated, and put into the system. We have open reservoirs, which I just mentioned. We also have a number of closed reservoirs throughout the system to help offset those peaking needs. We also have aquifer storage and recovery. What this is during periods of high flow, lots of moisture, precipitation, we have the ability to actually store water in the ground in that event, and then take it back out when periods are dry. And so we do have that system available to us as well on a smaller scale. And then we also have regional partnerships. So we are working with what's called the Joint Water Commission and with Portland Water Bureau. We have contracts for both for major elements of our supply. And then water conservation is also one of our sources. So in times when things get very tight, we actually look to cut back on demand in order to make to lengthen the supplies that we have. Next slide, please. So how do we use your money? So you're going to hear a lot more about the construction of the additional water supply. That's a big source of where all the money is currently going. And then maintenance and operations of the water system that we currently have. That system, in order to keep it doing what it's doing and has been doing, and to make sure it keeps doing that long into the future, we invest money into our maintenance and operations of the system. And then a good chunk of our budget actually goes to purchasing water from the Portland Water Bureau and from the Joint Water Commission, which I mentioned prior. Next slide, please. So here's what's happening to us. This is how I'm coming to reference this, is really showing the situation that we're at. We knew we would be facing this period many years ago, and many years ago, the board took very aggressive actions to try to put themselves in the strongest financial position, and I would argue they did, and put all of you in a strong financial position to take on these costs at this current time. However, with the recent increases that we're seeing, those just exceeded any of our forecasts, and you can see there the amount of money that we are looking to spend on the Willamette water supply. That's the light blue. The gray that you see on this graph, that gray is the kind of it is the in-district stuff that is just for TVWD and not for the whole Willamette Partnership Program. And you can see a portion of that spike peak you see in 2023 on the in-district capital investments that we're making. That peak is actually part of the Willamette program. It's what we call our Metzger pipeline, and that pipeline will be providing water down to the Metzger region off the Willamette program. But that is a cost that is only carried by TVWD and not along with our partner agencies. So this is our financial situation. And this is the reason that we are talking about rate increases right now, is the scale of these have risen dramatically in just the last 6 months or so. So let's go to the next slide. So what have we done to manage our costs? So we have reduced personnel services by 2.8%. That may not sound like a lot, but when you consider the district already operates pretty lean in terms of staff. If you look at our metrics, we're a pretty lean organization for what we do. And there have been positions where we've delayed hiring. We've done all we could and can to hold our personal services budget down and even less than what it was. We deferred $50 million worth of infrastructure projects. These weren't projects that they weren't really nice to haves. These were projects that we really need to do. But we realized right now we need to find every way we can to defer and get along with any existing resources we have. And we made some tough decisions to defer some of these significant capital projects that are associated with the Willamette water supply. We made those decisions prior to finding out about these increases. And again, we made those decisions with the idea that it would buy us some extra room in the event we saw costs go higher than what we we had anticipated. We just could have never nobody could have imagined the cost going up as much as they did in the short amount of time that they did. We've also partnered with other utilities to lower and spread the costs out more. So we've partnered with the city of Beaverton, we've partnered with the city of Hillsborough on the Willamette project. This certainly has helped a great deal to have these partnerships to help buy down the costs and spread these costs out over a larger customer base. Next slide, please. So I'm going to let Dave Kraska, he's our program director for the Willamette Supply, and I'm going to let him get into the details here, more on the Willamette Supply, what he's done to control costs there, and where we're headed with that, the remainder of that project. Dave?
Okay, thank you, Tom. So here's a slide that basically talks about my titles and the things I do. Tom's already covered them, so let's go on to the next slide, which covers the outline of my presentation. I got 4 parts. I want to talk to you a little bit about the long-term water supply selection. How did we end up going to the Willamette? An overview of the program, the delivery progress, and looking ahead. I'm going to move through these slides pretty quickly because I want to allow plenty of time for Paul's discussion about the district finances, and we can get to your questions. So it's really important here tonight. So next slide, please. So in terms of the long-term water supply selection, this was done back in 2013. So almost 10 years ago, TVWD completed a detailed analysis of its long-term water supply options. They're indicated, the 4 options are indicated in the graphic here on the right, starting from the top and continuing clockwise: groundwater wells, a new development source in Sauvie Island, or purchasing water from Portland, going to the Mid-Willamette River, or increasing storage at Hag Lake through the Joint Water Commission system. Ultimately, with a lot of public input and a lot of technical analysis, the Mid-Willamette River was selected because it's lower cost of all the options considered, excellent water quality, provides ownership of the water supply, it's a reliable supply, and it has fewer environmental impacts of all the other options considered. Next slide, please. So with the selection made, we were given a mission to complete, and I'll just read it out loud here. It is to provide a cost-effective, reliable, and resilient water supply system by July 2026 that benefits the current and future generations of the communities we serve and supports a vibrant local economy. A lot of great things in there. First, it gives us a deadline of July 2026, and it really kind of acknowledges that this is a generational investment. This is something that's going to last 100 years, so we got to do it right. Next slide. So an overview of the whole system looks like this. Starting at the south, it's our intake on the Willamette River, and it's an existing intake that we are improving the seismic resiliency of, and we're also expanding. We have a new state-of-the-art water treatment plant that we're building in Sherwood, more than 30 miles of large diameter transmission main, and water storage tanks. We're only constructing one of them right now, but the water storage tank is going to be constructed on the top of Cooper Mountain right off of Grabhorn Road. Next slide. So to make it a little more visually appealing, we've got some photos to give you an idea what these things look like. Down in Wilsonville is the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant shown in this photo here. One more click, Paul. And the flag that just popped up there is where our raw water intake is located. Go to the next slide, please, Paul. This is an aerial view. One more click, Paul. Aerial view of that same water treatment plant in the park right next to it on the Willamette River, and you see the dashed outline there shows the underground portion of our intake to the Willamette River and our raw water pump station right there. So that's what our future water supply is. Next slide, please. Regarding our water treatment plant that we're building in Sherwood, there's the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant shown in the photo here on the left that's been in operation since 2002, so 20 years now. And a graphic or an engineering drawing of what our treatment plant's going to look like here on the right. And what we're taking is all the successes that have been proven out in the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant and accounting for the technological advances that we've realized over the last 2 decades to provide what we call a multi-barrier treatment. That chart there on the lower right indicates on the left of that chart all the constituents, all the things that we want to remove from the water. And then across the top there are all the different major processes that we have at the water treatment plant. And going across for each one of those rows of each one of the constituents we want removed from the water to protect public health, you see multiple barriers, multiple ways that the treatment plant removes those constituents and produces safe, clean water for the customers. Next slide. As I said, more than 30 miles of pipeline will connect the communities to the Mid-Willamette River supply. So we're building our 66-inch, largely, most of it is 66-inch welded steel pipeline all over in different parts of Washington County right now. Next slide. And then finally, our water storage tanks will look something like this. These are actually the water storage tanks, 20 million gallon water storage tanks for the Joint Water Commission up on Fern Hill. These are two 20 million gallons tanks. Ours are going to be 15 million gallons. So similar design and construction, but just a little bit smaller. And we're only going to build one of them at this time. Next slide. So let's talk about the progress that we've made to date. Next slide, please. So to date, we've completed 7 of those individual pipeline projects. Paul will probably speak a little bit about the WIFIA loans that we've acquired, and that will save a lot of money in terms of repaying the loans. We received our federal permit for construction of the overall program, completed all of our planning and design, and now we're advancing 15 construction projects, and we're continuing successful partnerships, as Tom alluded to continue to save costs on the program to the extent that we can. Next slide. So in terms of what we've completed our seismic improvements at the raw water intake. So it is our single intake to the Willamette River, so we need to know that it's going to last the major earthquakes that we're anticipating coming one of these days. And so we did that by using jet grouting and deep soil mixing to improve the soil performance there, so it won't move to the Willamette River once the earthquake does happen, and our intake will stay intact. Next slide. If you've driven anywhere around Washington County, you've probably come across one or more of our pipeline projects. It looks something like this. This shows our pipeline installation next to Tile Flat Road. So it's basically trenching and excavation and shoring and excavators lifting our pipelines into location. Next slide. Sometimes we do our construction at night, and this is with a lot of careful planning. If it's best to get our construction done that way to avoid traffic impacts, we do so. This in particular is our crossing at 2 and 9th Avenue near Farmington Road. If you're in the vicinity of Hall Boulevard and Shoals Ferry Road, you'll see a lot of our nighttime construction occurring there right now, but we do that sometimes. Next slide. Another technology that we've employed in many parts of the county is trenchless construction. So in crossing creeks like this is actually Arrowhead Creek in Wilsonville, we found that it was the best for protecting the environment and also economically for using trenchless construction, where we create pits on either side of the wetland essentially that we're trying to cross, and we tunnel underneath it. We've used this technology in many places across the county. Next slide. And then we've also begun construction of our water treatment plant. As I pointed out, this is in the Sherwood. This is just on the eastern edge of Sherwood, right along Southwest 124th Avenue. Next slide. So, and also to date, 91% of the spend to date so far, more than $300 million, has gone to local businesses, employers, material suppliers, and so on. So a lot of the money is staying local, which is really a fantastic economic benefit to local businesses, as I mentioned. The balance is in regional areas, which is regional. We deem anywhere outside of the local areas, but also still within Oregon and Washington. Outside of Oregon and Washington, about 5% of the spend has gone to those places. Next slide. So looking ahead, next slide, please. So the work plan for this fiscal year, so fiscal year 2023 is July of 2022 through June of 2023. We're going to be advancing 15 construction projects and continuing the rest of our program management activities and continued acquisitions and continued planning. As far as the planning goes, at some point we're going to complete the construction of all these facilities, and we'll have to plan for the commissioning and startup and operations of it, and integrating the new supply into the existing distribution systems. but a lot of work to come, but really the lion's share of it over the next few years will be in construction. Next slide. So as Tom alluded to, we've realized what we've been hearing about in terms of inflation and supply chain issues and so on. We had been, for the first 7 years of running the program, very proud of our budget performance. In 2013, when the decision was made to go to the Willamette, the estimates for the construction of it were in the range of about $1.3 billion when considering the scope of what we're doing at this time with the final design. And we had held true to that budget up until the end of 2021. At the end of 2021, we bid some of our largest and last remaining projects, two of them shown here on the left-hand side, one of them being a reservoir and related pipeline project. On that one, we had an estimate of $117 million. And I'll say that was an estimate that was very well crafted. A lot of industry professionals had their hand in creating that estimate, but none of those industry professionals really understood the market at the time in terms of what really the COVID impacts and supply chain issues and other inflationary trends were having on our market. And we only realized it after we competitively bid the whole project and then finally got the bid price of $143 million. So that was a significant increase on that project. And then worse was the water treatment plant that we were bidding right around the same time. Again, a completely competitively bid project. So there was a lot of competition on this. And our estimated cost for that project, $292 million, and the final bid for it was $427 million. So again, an enormous impact on our overall budget. We did an evaluation of all of our remaining projects to bid to figure out what does this mean for the overall program, and that's where we came up with the $315 million increase to the customers. So our $1.3 billion program went to a $1.6 billion program. Paul will be able to explain the details of how that $315 million, how that really boils down to TVWD's share on this project. Next slide, please. So budget control is still extremely important to us. There's 6 ways that we go about doing this. As I mentioned, we maximize competition. Anywhere possible, whenever we're receiving materials or having contractors bid on our work, we try to make our projects as competitive as possible. And that really drives the price down as much as it possibly can. Once we have a contractor on board, we do our best to negotiate the best price and quality for services and goods that we're going to receive. To date, we make cost-effective engineering decisions, and going forward, as we're building these projects, there are still engineering decisions to be made that can affect the ultimate price. And so essentially the war on the budget never ends. We're constantly trying to get the most value out of every dollar we spend. Proactively managing risks is also very critical to us, anticipating when they come, mitigating them and managing them so that they're not realized, and so that we don't have to pay for risks that come up. Partnering projects on projects is another thing that we do. I've got another slide on that one that I'll present in a second, but essentially we try to partner with our projects. For example, we've partnered with Washington County a lot, where they're building roadways or expanding their roadways. We work with them to have our projects done at the same time. So we have one contractor doing both projects so that we're impacting the public only once, and also sharing in the cost savings. And finally, beyond that is rigorously managing all aspects of the program to stay on schedule. One of the worst ways or one of the most sure ways to blow budget is to blow schedule. So we're doing everything we possibly can to stay on schedule and meet that 2026 deadline. Next slide. This is my last slide here, so just want to underscore the partnerships that we're working with to, again, share the costs and control the cost and avoid costs. To begin with, the program itself is a partnership. TVWD and the cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton are program partners and sharing the costs of all of this relative to their overall investment in it, the overall amount of water that they're getting from it. And then across the bottom there are just three examples of partnerships that we've worked with on completing this program. The Kinsman Road project was a partnership with the city of Wilsonville and ODOT. 124th Avenue project, it was one of our partnerships with Washington County. And then the last one there on the right is South Hillsborough Pipeline project. coordinated with Newland developers, and there's various developers in the area that we've been partnering with and coordinating with to, again, save money on the program. I think that is my last slide, so if we can go to the next slide, I think I pass it to Paul from here. So take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Dave. I am Paul Matthews, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Water District. And first, I want to thank you all for attending our virtual open house. We know everybody has busy lives out there, and your attention to these matters is truly appreciated by all of us. I will go through the financial aspects of the project tonight, but before we start, I do want to give you just a high level of what I do here as the Chief Financial Officer. I oversee the financial management cycle, budget, financial planning, analysis, rate setting, accounting, auditing, debt, investment, procurement. So those are the things that I cover. The biggest priorities I have right now are managing the financial risk for the district during the COVID-19 period, and now during this period of heavy investment in the Willamette project, and to maintain our access to low-cost financing. We're in a major investment cycle, and so having access to low-cost financing is critically important, and then drive business efficiency and accountability. The district, like all responsibly managed utilities, we follow a four-step financial management process. And for those of you who have been with us and have attended open houses over the years, you'll find this familiar, the four steps that we go through. The first step is developing the financial strategy, the financial plan. We do that with the district's Board of Commissioners. That provides a financial plan, which is published on our website. It's a long-term cash flow perspective that makes sure that we have sufficient resources, financial resources, to meet our capital investment needs over time, and also to manage the district's financial risks, maintain our operational capacity. The second major pillar is the budget process. The district has a biennial budget subject to Oregon local budget law. We have a citizens budget committee that reviews our proposed budget, and they approve a budget that then goes to the board for its final adoption. That budget process establishes our legal appropriations for that 2-year period and sets the appropriations for different things. For example, personnel services versus material and services versus capital outlay. And now the third part are the rates, and that's what we're doing here tonight. We're taking the findings from the financial plan, the financial strategies, and the budget, and we're developing rates that will be consistent with those two processes. And then the last is delivering the water to our customers, the customer service, and all the things that the district's responsible for, including the major investment in our infrastructure. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I want to give you a high-level overview of the district's financial performance in 2022. Presented here is our operating expenditures. It's a cumulative view that builds over time. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30, so we're looking at the first full fiscal year in the biennium. As you can see there, the district actually are below budget on our capital expenditures by $7.8 million right now. Following generally accepted accounting principles, we will recognize some additional expenses in the coming months as we get invoices from vendors, but we're at about that $7.8 million of savings, and that's again our strategy of managing all of our operating expenses quite carefully. So we're going to end the fiscal year, even with these future adjustments, below budget, and we're happy about that. On the capital side, similarly, we are below budget, and these are in part due to the timing of particular capital projects. Many of those projects are now under construction, and we expect significant expenditures in the next 36 months. You saw the chart that Tom put up. I'll come back to that chart here in just a minute, but we are hitting that peak period of investment where we'll be spending as much as $1 million per day on capital projects. Water sales is a little bit of a mixed bag. Actually, we have a favorable variance in water sales in the last biennium, in the last fiscal year. We're ahead by a little bit over $1 million. However, because of accounting and revenue recognition standards, I think that's going to come down even tighter. So we're about on budget for our water sales revenues. Certainly this spring, the wet and cool spring that went well into June, depressed our water sales quite a bit in those months. and that'll be recognized over the coming months and have a somewhat of a downward effect. So right now, we have a favorable variance in water sales, but that's going to be closing. System development charges are one-time capital charges that new customers that connect to the system pay. This is designed so that our existing customers don't subsidize growth, that growth pays for itself, and we're on track for system development charges during the first year of the biennium. So bottom line, where are we? Revenues have largely recovered from COVID-19 impacts, but that cool and wet spring I was talking about is likely to reduce our revenues as we realize the revenues this summer. We're currently achieving plan, but again, I say that water sales are something that we are watching very carefully. I would say we're watching like a hawk. On the expenditures, we're under budget. Management is focused on all of our budget expenditures to provide that financial flexibility that we need, given these impacts, as well as the impacts from COVID-19, this inflationary impact. So we are managing our expenditure very good, and I'm happy to say that we are, in fact, under budget. On cash, although I mentioned that we're being prepared to spend about $1 million per day in the coming months, the district's in pretty good cash position. And in fact, we anticipate additional long-term debt, issuing some in early 2023 to keep our cash in a strong position. But right now, no challenges there. I want to cover the financial plan that we are currently operating under. First, I want to talk a little bit about the key drivers. The inflationary increase in the water supply system that Dave Kraska and Tom Hickman talked about are obviously driving the key drivers for our updated financial plan. We need to increase our financial capability, our capacity to borrow money to fund those infrastructure investments. So that's the key driver. So our strategy that we have is first, closely manage our operating capital expenditures, just like we did in the first half of the biennium. That needs to continue. In fact, will continue throughout the rest of the program. We're going to pursue federal and state assistance. Tom Hickman will actually come back and talk about that and some of the progress we've made in that. Third, we're going to increase our financial capacity to make sure that we can access the bond market to finance the Willamette Water Supply System infrastructure. These are long-term projects with lives well over 50, 100 years, and so we want to make sure that we're using debt in an appropriate way to fund those. The fourth item is to adopt rates that provide the financial resources in advance. This demonstrates to the credit markets that we are, in fact, a worthy borrower and keeps our cost of capital as low as possible. And the last item is we're going to continue to refine our customer assistance program because some of these impacts we understand are going to have detrimental effect on a growing number of our customers. I want to give you a couple examples, though, of how management is focused on reducing the impact on our customers. And one of these may sound just kind of like a small item, but Tom talked about how we've kept our personnel services actually had a reduction over a 2-year period, the entire biennium of 2.8%. So that's a pretty significant reduction on a year-over-year basis, if you think about it. Part of that is how we manage our healthcare costs. So the district purchases a high deductible plan. We're self-insured for a portion of that deductible, where we cover that with district resources. We have a wellness plan at TVWD that incentivizes our employees to use the healthcare system very effectively. And that incentivized has resulted in a 1.9% average annual decrease. I said decrease, not increase. This is an actual decrease in our healthcare premiums from the district's insurer over the past 4 years. So we've continued to drive down our cost in healthcare. That's just an example of how management is focusing on saving money. The other ones that I want to talk about is our WIFIA draw. And this is on the revenue side, the resource side. The district entered into a loan with the EPA, our WIFIA loan. We're charged an interest rate of 1.35%. Well, in about April, the interest rates that we could earn on our short-term investments started to exceed that 1.35%. So we took an immediate large draw of over $100 million from the WIFIA program. We invested that in U.S. Treasury certificates to generate about $5 million in earnings to offset expenses for the program. So these are examples where management is focused on trying to mitigate the impact that the inflationary cost increases is having on customers. I want to jump back to the chart that Tom showed you earlier. And he went through and explained the blue area there is for the water supply program. The gray area is for our in-district CIP, including that Metzger Pipeline East, which connects all the way around east to the rest of the water supply system. So we have two ways of feeding both the Metzger area as well as the Wolf Creek system. We can answer questions about that if you have them. But the important thing to highlight here is overall, we're spending about, over the next 10 years, $1.1 billion all in on the Willamette, as well as our investment in the Joint Water Commission and the other improvements that we need to make here at the district to move the water around and maintain the viability of the infrastructure. So that is being financed in part. I show here, this is the same graph, we've superimposed the bar charts, which show the sources of borrowing that we're looking at. I mentioned the WIFIA, which is that low interest loan that we got from the EPA at 1.35%. But in addition to that, to fund these increases, we're looking at about $180 million. Now that number is very volatile. It can change quite a bit depending on interest rates, water sales, and a lot of factors. When we look at our financial plan, that number moves around quite a bit. But for right now, given the givens and assuming the assumptions, about $180 million total increase in debt. So that's about $568 million that we're planning to finance, hence the importance of us maintaining our financial capacity. As I've talked to you in the past, and if you've been a part of these discussions, you've heard me talk about the risks to the forecast. And I don't want to go through all these risks in too much detail, just to let you know that we are looking at operational risks. Interest rate risk is another important one that we're monitoring. Interest rates are correlated strongly to inflation, so we're watching that very carefully. Capital expenditures, obviously those inflationary impacts are not done. They're affecting the other in-district CIP as well as the Willamette CIP. So we're looking at our construction costs very carefully. And then there are the other things. And in fact, when we talked about this last year, if you were part of this, I talked about the impact of potential international unrest. And in fact, we had a war that is contributing to these factors. So we're going to continue to monitor these risks. We don't control them, but we do want to monitor them so we can take action as early as possible so that we can have as many options available and reduce the potential for adverse impacts. So the impacts that we're looking at on customer bills, first of all, the district has two components to its bill: a fixed monthly charge. Most of our customers are billed bi-monthly. We present these on a monthly basis because most other utilities are billed on a monthly basis. It makes the comparison a little bit easier. Two components, though, we've got the fixed monthly charge, and then we have a volume charge. And I'm going to talk first about the fixed monthly charges. These are the increases here. It depends on the size of the meter. Those fixed monthly charges cover the cost of maintaining the meters, reading the meters, issuing bills, as well as some of the public fire protection costs that we have. Whether you use water or not, we still provide water for fire suppression throughout the district, and that's an expensive part. That is a portion that is included in those fixed monthly charges. In addition, we have our volume rates. The district has a two-block rate structure. So for residential customers, for the first 14 CCF per month or 28 CCF in a 2-month period, that's subject to the block 1 rate. Block 2 is for any consumption over that. And for commercial and industrial customers, it's 140% of their 12-month moving average consumption. Those thresholds and those dollar amounts are designed to charge people in proportion to the cost of providing them the water. So it's based on our cost of service policy that we have to make the rates and the bills proportionate to cost. The more water we use during the peak period, we have to secure additional water. We oversize facilities to meet that need. And those customers that use more water during the peak period are charged slightly higher amount to cover that cost. So where does that leave us? Impact on our customers. Present this chart here, or this table, which explains the impact first for a typical single-family residential customer. That's a customer with a 5/8 inch meter. It's our most common meter that uses 7 CCF per month, the most common bill that we issue. That's just to keep in mind that's over 5,200 gallons per month, or about 22 tons of water that we provide on a monthly basis. That bill will go up forecast to go up about $8.81, which is what Tom had talked about, $3 more than what we had projected last year. For customers that are above average customers, using about 12 CCF of water per month, that's about 9,000 gallons per month, or more than 37 tons of water per month. The increase will be about $13.21 per month. And for customers that have very high use of 28 CCF per month, that's a very large customer. That's over or almost 21,000 gallons on a monthly basis, or over 87 tons of water that we would deliver on a monthly basis. The impact is about $32 per month. So that's quite a large customer there. With that, I'll turn it back over to Tom for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Paul. And I want to point out that none of this is information that we are excited to be presenting. These are factual pieces of information that we are sharing, and we're trying to share in a timely way. We realize nobody wants to see rates go up. We understand that, but we are in this unfortunate situation where we have to take action in order to make sure that the district remains financially sound. And that is the purpose of tonight's meeting, is to let you know what actions we are taking, that our board is taking in order to remain financially sound. In our efforts to manage impacts, efforts to date, we have received $1 million from in a House appropriations bill, and it was specifically earmarked for the treatment plant. We just recently, in the last few weeks here, we got an additional $3 million through a House appropriations bill, thanks to Representative Bonamici, to help offset some of these inflationary costs. We also, at the same time, had a similar bill, $20 million request that was moving through on the Senate side, on the Senate appropriations. Unfortunately, we didn't get on that. We didn't make it through. But we made an effort to get it. I just think it's important you understand we are trying to find dollars everywhere we can, regardless of their amounts. And then last week and then today, we met with some of the state legislators, and we are talking to them and prepping them for us coming to them here in this next legislative session, and asking for a $75 million funding request to help us offset these increases. Until those are secure, we have to take these other actions, like this 14.25% rate increase. And if we are able to secure this money, it would reduce what we have to do in the future for increases. And then, as Paul pointed out, we've also had savings on the healthcare side. That I think is pretty incredible personally, considering healthcare for many companies and agencies. They are really struggling with increases there, and we've managed to actually reduce our costs there and generate savings. And then also, as Paul pointed out, the WIFIA loan, the draws we've been able to take on that and actually make some strategic investments in the short term to make some money on that is also something we are doing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this back over, I think, to Andrea, so she can talk to you about how you can participate, what you can do, and then for us to be able to answer any questions you may have. Andrea?
Okay. Thank you very much, Tom and Paul and Dave, for great content for our customers. just as a reminder, that little thought bubble with the question is where you can type in your questions, and Justin will be locating someone to answer those for you. But just as a reminder, rate setting process is a public process. In addition to this information session tonight, we have 2 more of these. The content that you heard tonight will be exactly the same, but we'll repeat this tomorrow at noon virtually. And then Saturday, we're opening up our lobby and we're going to have you in person at 9 a.m. here at our headquarters offices on the corner of 170th and Merlot. We also, our board welcomes written comments. They'll take those by email or mail if you want to send us a letter, or we have an online form at tvwd.org/rates. And there's some information there too, some frequently asked questions and a kind of a recap of the information that you got today. And then we'll be adding a copy of this video and the slide deck there. Then the board also has a public hearing that will open up next Wednesday evening, and we'll close in about a week after that. And then they'll take any testimony at that meeting. If you'd like to participate, you can contact Debbie Carper. Her email is there. This information is also on our website. And then we will give them all the written comments that are submitted, as well as the questions and answers from these sessions and any other input we get via email or other sources. We'll provide that to the board in advance so they can consider that input, and then they will make a decision at the board meeting on September 21st. So that's a roundup of the additional ways that you can participate in this process. And I'm going to turn it over to Justin to moderate the questions and answers.
Thanks, Andrea. The first 2 questions are going to be probably best handled by Tom. So Tom, get ready. First one reads as, was the 9.5% rate increase intended to cover the ratepayer's share of the original 1.3 billion? And what options do I, as a ratepayer, have to refuse this price increase? Is there a vote? Do I have an alternative water source? Is TVWD a public-private partnership where I can lobby my local representative to find a different supplier?
So thank you for the question. I believe the first and second question there might actually be one and the same. So I'm going to take part of it, and I'm going to probably lean on Paul here a little bit as well to help me out with some of this. I do believe our 9.5%, when we put our financial plan together, it was set up in order to cover what we knew the cost to be at that time for all of our expenses. And it was intended to cover all of our operating maintenance costs as well as the Willamette costs in that $1.3 billion project, our portion of it. And just to be clear, to date, we've gotten very little federal or state assistance for this project. So that project is all being funded by rates for the most part, other than that 3 million I mentioned and the million I mentioned. The rest of that is being funded by all of you, by our ratepayers. And as for an alternative water source, or do you have a way to refuse this? I wish we did. Frankly, I wish we had a way to say there's another option here. Unfortunately, we don't have any other options in front of us. We can't cut our way out of a $315 million increase that occurred due to things outside our control. We don't have a way to offset that kind of number. As I mentioned during my presentation, we had made some significant reductions in the project to the tune of $50 million, more than $50 million, in anticipating that we could see increases. And it just dwarfed what we thought would have been more than sufficient. And then your question, can you lobby? Well, this is your opportunity, as Andrea had just had up there. You have an elected board here that does represent you, and they certainly, along with our budget committee, listen to the public, and they then provide us policy direction on what they want us to implement. So I mentioned earlier that we have some of our board members are on this call this evening, and they're listening to you right now. So I think I've answered all those. Paul, is there anything you would like to clarify in what I just said in terms of the 9.5%, if that was adequate?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it, Tom. It's important to know that the 9.5% increase wasn't just to fund not just to fund the $1.3 billion program. It also funds our investment in our other infrastructure that we have that's required to keep the system up to speed, as well as some improvements to move the Willamette water around within our system, and our increase in operation expenses. So just like everyone else, we've had increases in the cost of electricity, we've had increase in the cost of diesel, and all the other components and the chemicals that we use throughout the system. So that 9.5% was designed to cover those costs that we knew at the time we prepared that. And of course, now those costs have gone up even more than we had anticipated back in 2021.
Thanks, Paul. And we'll get back to the second question here. There's one part of it that is slightly different than the first. And Paul, it might be a question for you to answer. It says here, if so, why was the increase in projected cost of $313 million, 24%, triggering such a substantial increase in rates? 15% increase is a 50% increase over the originally proposed 9.5% rate increase.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer to that question is actually quite detailed, but let me just take it in steps. First of all, I just mentioned that the 9.5% wasn't just to cover the 1.3 billion. We had the additional complication. Also, the $315 or $313 million increase in the program is not TVWD share. That's partly shared with the partnership. So when we look at the $1.3 billion program and the $1.6 billion program, actually, because of the cost increase hit the treatment plant, we had greater exposure to that because the way that we're buying capacity in the treatment plant. Now, there's a lot of details behind that and why, but TVWD has a greater exposure to that than some of the other partners, and that is meaning that that 9.5% is slightly different. And then the last item that's very important is how this affects the district's financial structure, our capital structure, and our net leverage, and how we have to present ourselves to the bond market. It requires that we do certain revenue increases so we have the capacity to borrow the additional money. Early on, the first borrowing we did was at a very favorable rate through the EPA, that 1.35% increase. This additional borrowing that we have, the terms aren't going to be quite so generous. They're going to be traditional revenue bonds. The interest rate will be higher, but so will some of the other borrowing terms. So that will require greater rate increases to support that borrowing. I don't want to get into too many details, but I hope that explains overall. And if there are follow-up questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a comment and a question posted by a customer here. The comment is, my rate is already too high and we don't use much water. The question, Paul, this will be for you as well. Do you anticipate a rate reduction in 2026 or thereafter?
So before Paul jumps in on that one, I would like to point out one of the things that it frequently happens is, and it's understandable, is people get their water bill and they don't look that the bill's broken into two separate parts, the water and the sewer. And they're also billed for 2 months of usage. So, because that's how we read meters. So I just want to remind people when they look at their bill, it's for 2 months of usage and it is for water, which is what we do. And then we also bill for clean water services. And so it's that portion of the bill as well. So I understand when people say that their bill is already too high. I just try to remind people that they are getting 2 months of 2 bills when they see that bill.
And let me address the question, Justin, if that's appropriate this time, on rate reductions. We do not anticipate rate reductions. We've developed the financial plan. That's very disruptive. Have rates come up and go down. So we've developed the financial plan, the use of long-term debt to avoid that. We've also focused on our capital improvements to defer projects that we can to the later period starting 2030 beyond. So that will provide us the financial capacity to complete that capital investment without needing to borrow additional money. So what we'll see is the rate increases coming down. If a rate increase isn't required, we wouldn't impose one. But the financial plan does show continuing need for capital investment in the system, and we don't anticipate a rate reduction. That we've used financial techniques like long-term debt to avoid having rates come up and then go down.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a comment from customers Melody and Gary. Says, thank you all for making this information available to us and in an understandable format. We appreciate that feedback. And we've got a question from a customer who writes in, and let's tee up Dave Kraska for this. Question is, what about the raw sewage in the Willamette and chemicals from runoff?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for the question. So there have been reported in the media sewer overflows from time to time. Typically, it's during storm events. Not all of those reported in the media are upstream of our intake. Some of them are downstream of our intake. So the mitigating factors for us regarding those sewer overflows is the capacity of the Willamette River is very large. And so even though a sewer overflow does present essentially an insult in terms of the water quality of the Willamette River, dilution is a huge factor there as well. However, to that matter, it's one of the main reasons why we designed the water treatment plant we're building with all the technological advances that are available today, and primarily the multi-barrier treatment that we have applied at it. So as I mentioned in my presentation, for every type of constituent, whether it be bacteriological contamination or chemical contamination or so on, we have multiple barriers to remove that and to protect public health, to protect the cleanliness of the water that we're delivering to customers. And furthermore, if there were such an event that created such a hazard in the Willamette River, we do have the potential or the opportunity to shut down the intake for a period of time, to let it go past, and until it clears out from that area in the Willamette River before we turn the plant back on. And that's one of the benefits, as Tom alluded to earlier in his presentation, about having multiple sources. Is in a situation like this, in terms of supply resilience, having multiple sources is key. But it's extremely unlikely that we would ever need to do that. But I just wanted to state that is another tool that can be used to manage water quality and protect public health. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Dave. And we've got one question left. So as a last call for questions before we get started, please use the thought bubble with the question mark in it, and we'll get our last question underway here. And I'm going to call on our Chief Operations Officer, Pete Boone, to answer this. It's from Melody and Gary. Question on aquifers. The water is being stored into the ground. All ground is permeable. So if you store 1 million gallons of water, how much of that can you get back?
Yeah, so the aquifer that we're using for this ASR, or aquifer storage and recovery, is in Columbia River basalt. So that's the hard gray rock that you would see typically on somebody's driveway in the form of crushed rock. But when that's in its in situ form in the Cooper Mountain area where we have our wells, it's got layers that are called the interflow zones that are formed as that rock is laid down by lava over millions of years. So those interflow zones are the portions of the aquifer that are actually permeable. It's not an open cavern that you might think about. But the water, as we inject it into the ground, it spreads out into that interflow zone, and we can actually very effectively pull it back. Our water rights allow us to recover up to 98% of what's injected, but physically we could recover all of it and even more. And actually we have groundwater rights as well, so we can actually pump and use native groundwater under the water rights that we have. So to answer the question, we can get it all back, and it's just a matter of managing that groundwater supply in conjunction with the ASR water rights that we have.
Thank you, Pete. And that is the final question for the evening. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tom and Andrea.
Thank you, Justin. I just want to thank you for taking the time to hear this. We do appreciate your engagement, your feedback. We do understand this is concerning to us. It's concerning to many of you. We want to let you know that we are trying to do all we can to manage costs, to keep this under control. But we also need to make sure that we are being fiscally prudent and don't allow things to get worse or in any way brushed under the rug. And so we are being proactive by taking these measures. Our board is being proactive. And if we are successful in getting significant grant funding, then it certainly will lessen impacts in a future date, which we all are trying very hard and pushing for. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. If you have questions after that, please reach out, let us know. Or if you feel like there's something we didn't address to your satisfaction, please let us know so we can make sure we do answer your question to your satisfaction. And with that, thank you and have a great evening.